Ciao a tutti. Hi, welcome to the Swiss Film Club. It's the Settimana della Lingua Italiana, the Italian Language Week, and that's why we have picked the Swiss film in Italian for you this month. We picked For the Climbing by Bindu Stoppani. And we have the pleasure of welcoming Bindu to this conversation today. Benvenuta, Bindu.
Grazie, benvenuta, grazie per avermi con voi. Sono molto felice di far parte di questa settimana del cinema nella lingua italiana.
Thank you so much. We are currently celebrating the Italian language, so I would also like to know a bit more about your connection personally to the Italian language and also why you chose to do this film in Italian and not in English.
So my connection with the Italian language is that I'm from Ticino in Switzerland. My mother is from there, and I grew up in Ticino, partly grew up in Ticino, where my grandmother lived and my great auntie and my family comes from. And the reason I decided to make this film in Italian is because my connection with the Swiss-Italian TV, Radio Televisione della Svizzera Italiana, has been very close for years, and I pitched this idea about a group of women who have a mission to scatter the ashes of one of their friends and get lost in the Swiss mountains, and it felt appropriate that it was in Italian. I mean, I speak a little bit of German and French, but Italian is my mother tongue, and so it felt like the appropriate language to be telling the story in.
Wonderful. And you already mentioned the movie story a little bit, this trip that the women make to scatter the ashes in the mountains. And I want to talk a little bit to you about this motif of traveling. So your characters often, they go on trips to figure out themselves, to figure out their lives. Also in other movies of yours, like Finding Gummy or Chomp. So I'm wondering, why do you like sending your protagonists on a journey in your films?
So that's so interesting that you made that observation. And I think traveling has been a part of my life for a way since I was a small child. I mean, although I'm from Switzerland, Ticino, I was born in India, and I've traveled the world many, many times. And so traveling has always been a kind of symbolic activity for me, and a place where I feel really at home. And I think all of us, through travel or journeys, are able to then experience our own inner journey and our own, I suppose, resolving of certain questions that we might have of ourselves. And I always think that the physical travel can help the internal travel. And I love that kind of storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely. And it translates very well on the screen, I have to say. And another observation is, of course, that this group of friends that go on a trip, it's exclusively female. So it's all women. They have been very close friends when they were younger, and they live very different lives now when we met them or when we meet them. What sparked this specific idea of portraying female friendship for you?
So that's a really interesting question. So this idea was sparked by a trip that my husband actually took with his friends. He went to Morocco and climbed Mount Toubkal and came back with regaling stories of what they got up to and how the experience was for them. And I got me thinking about how rarely we see that kind of journey represented within a female storytelling capacity. And it got me thinking about how would women fare in such a situation? How would we get along? How would we deal with problems? How would we deal with issues? And which then led me on to the concept of friendship. And it's something that I've been thinking lots about female friendships and how, in my experience, so often women are pipped against each other, and feels like there's only room for one person at the table, one woman at the table. And so we have learned over centuries to kind of fight our fellow sisters and not work together. And I was intrigued by the concept of throwing these four women together and really having no men around to be competitive with each other about, and of course the film will reveal other things, but it was just about exploring how women, we've forgotten the art of working together to achieve something greater than us, and that sisterhood. And I was intrigued by that concept and wanted to tell that story, and to show also the kind of ugly side of friendship and the competition that women fall into, and the comparing. And so for me, these four women represent really different facets of one woman. You know, there's very different characteristics between all these four women, and they're very much entrenched in these identities, and then slowly those identities start to wear off.
Yeah, so you mentioned you're really interested in that difference, you know, between male and female friendship. And I read that you also did more or less like a survey with women. You asked them, first of all, how would they define friendship? What's friendship for them? And then how would they say that female friendship differs from male friendship? What were the main outcomes or findings there? And then how do we now find those results in the movie?
So it's interesting. I think obviously as a woman, it's hard to know how male friendships work. But I think female friendships, what has come up from, I did a lot of surveys with both friends of mine, but also other women. And I read lots of books on the psychology of friendship and the psychology of women. And what has really come up was the kind of competitive nature that men have is very different competitive nature within female friendships, and how, yeah, we still are so entrenched in this belief that there isn't a lot of room for us, and so we have to constantly vie for that space to be heard, to be seen, to be admired. But when female friendships work, they are so incredibly profound and so lifelong. And also I think what really came up in the research I did was around heartbreak, friendship heartbreak. That, you know, we focus lots in stories about romantic heartbreak, but we very rarely look at the heartbreak that happens when you lose a friend, when you are ghosted by a friend or thwarted by a friend. You know, those heartbreaks can be carried by women for the whole of their life. You know, the friendships that went wrong, the friendships that ended for no reason and you don't understand why. And so that was really interesting to me as well, about looking at the intrinsic heartbreak that friendship can be or can have, and the impact that has on you.
The nicer it is, or the more beautiful it is that these women are able to overcome, you know, these obstacles and to actually reconnect and become friends again. Because we do see all these tensions that you mentioned in the beginning. Everybody's really set in their way. Some people want to take over control. So it's a really interesting dynamic. I think you portrayed that really, really well in the film. I really see that, everything you mentioned there in the film. There is one man, though, so I would like to talk quickly about him as well. So there is one man that they encounter, and they first want help from him, but then something else happens. So why did you decide to bring in this hiker, or this other person?
So again, you know, pushing the boundary on kind of female friendships and female dynamics, I thought it was important to throw the male gaze on this group of women, and the male energy on this group of women, in the form of this hiker who actually is on a silent retreat, and he doesn't really want to engage or communicate with these women, let alone these type of women, you know, this particular group of women. And I found that quite amusing, that the concept of what happens to us women when we are confronted by a man within the system, and how we all somehow lose ourselves and we become in need of the man in order to to save us or give us identity or give us a sense or something to fight against, whatever it is, you know. And so for me, he was just a kind of projection of these women's egos, you know, and how they just kind of he is silent throughout, and they just project all this stuff onto him. And I thought that was quite an interesting and amusing take on the two genders and how they meet and how that dynamic works. I also was really intrigued by the idea of a man not speaking in a movie, you know, of having the women be the ones who are always verbal and talking, and the man being the silent one until he's not, you know, until he has to shout. Because so often women are represented in movies and in stories and certainly through history as very silent creatures there in the service of a man, and their stories not really being told. So I enjoyed flipping this on its side and on its head and exploring that.
Yep, that's a very interesting take. And I would also like to talk about the landscape a little bit, because of course it's very spectacular. It's set in the beautiful Cento Valli in Ticino in the south of Switzerland. But it also brought its challenges because it is a protected area. And the theme of this year's Settimana della Lingua Italiana actually is also sustainability. So I would like to talk about that aspect, because of course for you it was important not to leave traces, not to disturb the nature around you when filming. So what does sustainable filmmaking look like, or especially like in this film, what challenges did this bring when you were filming in the Cento Valli?
Yeah, that's a really interesting take on it. So we filmed 14 Climbing just after the first lockdown. And so, you know, we were still kind of in the COVID world of not really understanding how filmmaking would transpire, how it would work, and we couldn't really be very close to each other, and we had to, you know, so this film actually was written in the 2 years prior to COVID, and when COVID hit, it felt like such an appropriate story to be telling, because 98% of it we filmed outdoors. It was just 5 actors and the crew. And so it felt like the right movie to be making at this time in our history. But what was also interesting, I mean, you're right, the nature and the landscape is another character in the story. You know, it's the mother nature that encompasses and holds these characters on their journey is by far the most forceful and strong element of the story. And we as a crew also encountered that force. You know, we're filming up in the mountains where the oxygen levels are anyway quite limited. And so, you know, lugging crew equipment. And so it was very much, you know, on our feet, in the countryside, in the mountains, in the nature, making sure we were not leaving a footprint after us, whether it's, you know, the natural rubbish that happens when you're on a film set. That was very much looked after and taken care of. Oh, apologies. And then what was also really interesting was to kind of work with the nature, you know, work with whatever the weather was giving us and respond to it rather than kind of impose anything. The other thing that filmmaking really can have a detrimental impact on the environment is around costumes and props and equipment that, you know, gets used once for the film and then gets never used again. And so the kind of recyclable nature of filmmaking is really important. And for us, you know, having 5 characters who are basically dressed in the same clothes the whole entire movie meant that for 5 weeks, you know, the costumes were the costumes. There were no other costumes. We layered up and layered down depending on what was necessary in the story and in the nature. But that's what was. And the same with our props. You know, what they had in their backpacks was what they had in their backpacks. The rest was, you know, we didn't have big sets that had lots of stuff. So in that sustainability, it felt like a really sustainable movie and really intimate movie.
I'm also wondering, because of the landscape that you chose, I mean, you need so much equipment, you know, cameras and lighting and all of that. How did you get all of that up the mountain?
Yeah, I think that we did lots of scouting at first, and you know, we were well aware of what our challenges might be, but I think, you know, that first week, all of us, the crew and cast, were quite taken aback by the amount of effort that you make in just, you know, doing maybe 100 meters, but it's up a steep hill and the oxygen levels are really low, and so, you know, kind of headaches and the extra effort that you've got to put in to carrying the equipment and carrying the costumes. And so that was the first few days. We were like, oh, okay, we need to reevaluate this, because it can look and feel like a small film, and, you know, not many actors, not many crew, but actually the effort that one needed to put in was greater than what we expected. I had a couple of weeks of rehearsal with the actresses, which was amazing, and we spent lots of time on the different sets, and, you know, they explored the different challenges. And the funny thing was that all of them, you know, when they first arrived, they were all very squirmish of like any, you know, cricket in the grass, or, you know, a bug here, and, you know, the cow dung there. And they were all like, you know, and then by the end of the shoot, they were like rolling in the grass. And, you know, so we've got lots of wonderful backstage stuff where, you know, their transformation as women is also, and as actors, and was also really apparent, and that was really beautiful to see. And the same with the crew. You know, the crew are always much more gung-ho about throwing themselves into situations anyway, but we you know, we were trying things out without big equipment. You know, we were building dolly sets and trolleys and things like that, just from the creativity of the grips and the riggers. And it was, yeah, it was good fun.
Sounds like a proper adventure.
Yes,
Filming this
exactly.
movie. And yeah, so, and of course I would like to know what's ahead. What other adventures are you embarking on? So what can we look forward to in terms of projects?
So what I'm currently working on is yet to be seen. I just finished a television series called Signora Volpe, which is a British crime spy drama for an American channel called Acorn TV. So that will be coming out next year in 2024. But what one can watch of my work, I suppose the most accessible show is the romantic comedy that I wrote and directed based on a book I optioned called An Astrological Guide for Broken Hearts, which you can see on Netflix, season 1 and season 2. It's just a joyous romantic comedy looking at love and the stars. And yeah, I mean, it's slightly different genre than 40 and Climbing, but it's still kind of comedy. And yeah, I hope people can see it in Canada and will enjoy it, I'm sure.
We're absolutely looking forward to seeing what's coming next. Thank you so much, Bindu Stoppani, for taking the time to take us a little bit behind the scenes of 40 and Climbing. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
It's a super, super pleasure. Buona visione e grazie a tutti. Buona settimana del cinema ticinese.